I stood outside St. Mary's Cathedral, wearing the only decent suit I owned, watching 320 guests enter through the ornate wooden doors. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my tie for the 5th time. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, my daughter Brenda's wedding day. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I had worked 3 jobs for 23 years to give her everything she needed after Isabel died. Carpentry during the day, security guard at night, and weekend construction work. Every blister, every ache, every exhausting 16-hour day had been worth it to see her graduate from university, to see her succeed, to see her happy. As I approached the church entrance, I noticed Brenda standing just inside the doorway with her future husband Alejandro. She was radiant in her white dress, but when she saw me, her expression changed completely. The joy vanished from her face, replaced by something that made my stomach drop. "Dad, what are you doing here so early?" she asked, but her tone wasn't welcoming. It was sharp, almost accusatory. "I wanted to make sure everything was perfect for you, Mija," I replied, using the pet name I'd called her since she was little. "This is your special day." Brenda glanced nervously at Alejandro, who was watching our interaction with obvious discomfort. Several guests had stopped to observe what was happening, and I could feel their eyes on us. "Dad, we need to talk," Brenda said, pulling me aside. "I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I don't know how to say this gently." My heart began to race. Something was very wrong. "You're a failure, Dad," she said quietly, but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I don't want you here in front of important people. You embarrass me." The words hit me like physical blows. I staggered backward, feeling the blood drain from my face. Around us, conversations stopped. People were staring now, witnessing my public humiliation. "Brenda, please," I whispered. "I'm your father. I raised you. I love you." "You raised me poorly," she continued, her voice growing stronger, more confident. "Look at you. Look at this cheap suit. Look at your hands. They're stained from work. Alejandro's family is here. Important business people, politicians, society members. I can't have them thinking I come from this." Alejandro stepped forward with a cruel smile. "Sir, I think it's best if you leave. This is a sophisticated event, and frankly, you don't fit the image we're trying to project." I looked at my daughter, searching for any trace of the little girl who used to run into my arms when I came home from work, covered in sawdust, but always ready with hugs and stories. That little girl was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "Brenda, your mother would be heartbroken to see this," I said, my voice breaking. "Don't you dare bring Mom into this," she snapped. "Mom would understand. She would want me to marry well, to move up in society, not to be dragged down by memories of poverty and struggle." The guests were openly staring now. Some were recording with their phones. My humiliation was being documented for social media, for their entertainment. Alejandro laughed and physically pushed me toward the door. "Come on, old man. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stumbled backward, my heart shattering into pieces. 23 years of sacrifice, of love, of dedication, all dismissed in front of 320 strangers who would remember this moment as entertainment. But as I stood there, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life, I remembered something. Something Isabel had left for me. Something I'd carried for 3 years, waiting for the right moment. I took a deep breath and looked at my daughter one last time. "Brenda, before I go, there's something your mother wanted you to know." I pulled out my phone with steady hands, despite the trembling in my chest. The guests who had been moving toward their seats stopped, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Brenda's face showed irritation mixed with curiosity. "Dad, what are you doing?" "We don't have time for your dramatics. This will only take a few minutes," I said, my voice stronger now. "But your mother insisted that you hear this on your wedding day, no matter what." I walked past Brenda and Alejandro, moving toward the altar. My footsteps echoed in the suddenly quiet cathedral. People were whispering, confused by this unexpected turn of events. "If you won't let me stay as your father," I called out, my voice carrying through the vaulted space, "then at least let me deliver your mother's final message." I reached the microphone at the altar and connected my phone. The church's sound system crackled to life, and suddenly Isabel's voice filled the cathedral, warm, loving, and unmistakably real. "My dearest Brenda," her voice began, and I saw my daughter's face go pale. "If you're hearing this, it means you're getting married, and it also means that something has gone wrong between you and your father." The entire church fell silent. Even Alejandro's arrogant expression shifted to one of uncomfortable attention. Isabel's voice continued. "Mija, there are things I never told you about your father, about our family, about sacrifices that were made for you. I'm recording this because I know that one day you might forget how much you are loved." Brenda was staring at the speakers now, tears forming in her eyes. This was the first time she'd heard her mother's voice in 3 years. "David, if you're playing this, it means our daughter has broken your heart, but she needs to know the truth. Brenda, honey, your father sold his thriving carpentry business to pay for my cancer treatments. He could have been wealthy, successful, respected, everything you seem to value now. Instead, he chose love." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Alejandro's family exchanged uncomfortable glances. "But there's something else, something bigger that I need to tell you. Brenda, you are going to inherit a fortune, not from your father but from my family, the Herreras. They disowned me when I married David, because they thought he was beneath our social class. They're some of the wealthiest people in the state." The silence in the church was now complete. You could hear a pin drop. "My father, your grandfather, died 2 years ago. My lawyer contacted me just before I got sick. He left everything to his only grandchild. You. $28 million, 3 properties, and a successful import business. But there was a condition." Brenda was crying openly now, her hands covering her mouth in shock. "The inheritance can only be claimed if you prove that you understand the value of unconditional love. If you can show that you treasure your father not for what he can give you, but for who he is. If you demonstrate that you've learned the difference between real love and social climbing." Alejandro's face had gone from confusion to intense interest. His family was whispering excitedly among themselves. "Brenda, your father has carried the legal documents for 3 years, waiting for you to mature enough to handle this responsibility. He never told you because he wanted to be sure you could love him for himself, not for what he could provide." Isabel's voice became softer, more intimate. "My darling daughter, look at the man who raised you. Really look at him. See the calluses on his hands from working to support you. See the lines around his eyes from worrying about you. See the love that has never wavered, even when you've been unkind." The recording paused for a moment, and in that silence, 320 people waited to hear what would come next. "David, mi amor, if she can't see your worth even after hearing this, then donate the money to charity. Our daughter will have learned that some lessons are more valuable than any inheritance." The recording ended, and the church remained silent. Brenda was sobbing now, looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was a child, vulnerable, ashamed, and desperate for forgiveness. But Alejandro's reaction was what interested me most. His eyes had lit up with greed the moment he heard $28 million. The silence in the cathedral stretched on as Brenda continued to sob, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks in dark streams. I stood at the altar, holding my phone, watching my daughter process everything she had just heard. The weight of 3 years of secrets hung heavy in the air. Alejandro was the first to break the silence. His voice, which had been so cruel and dismissive minutes earlier, now carried a completely different tone, one of calculated interest. "Brenda, sweetheart," he said, moving toward her with newfound tenderness. "I had no idea about your family's circumstances. Perhaps we should sit down and discuss this properly." I watched as his family members, his parents, siblings, and their wealthy friends, began whispering among themselves with obvious excitement. The same people who had been laughing at my humiliation were now looking at Brenda with renewed respect and interest. But I knew my daughter better than anyone, even after years of growing distance between us. I could see the confusion and shame warring in her expression. She looked up at me from where she stood near the church entrance, her white dress wrinkled from her emotional breakdown. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast space. "Is it true? Did you really sell your business for Mum's treatments?" I nodded slowly. "Every penny, Mija. I owned Mendoza Custom Carpentry. We had contracts with luxury hotels, high-end homes, even some government buildings. I employed 12 people. But when your mother got sick, insurance wouldn't cover the experimental treatments that might have saved her. But you never told me," she said, taking a few steps toward the altar. "You let me think we were poor because you weren't ambitious enough." The pain in her voice was real, But I could also hear something else, the beginning of understanding. Your mother made me promise not to tell you, I explained. She said you needed to focus on your studies, on building your own life. She didn't want you to feel guilty or obligated. She wanted you to love me for who I was, not for what I had sacrificed. Alejandro's mother, a woman dripping in jewelry and designer clothes, stepped forward with a bright smile that hadn't been there 10 minutes earlier. Mr. Mendoza, she said with false warmth, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. We're so sorry for the confusion at the door. Wedding days are stressful, and sometimes people say things they don't mean. I looked at her with steady eyes. Ma'am, your son pushed me and told me I didn't belong here because of how I looked. Your family laughed while my daughter called me a failure. There was no misunderstanding. Alejandro's father joined the conversation, his businessman's instincts clearly engaged. David, may I call you David? Let's not dwell on minor social missteps. What matters now is family unity. After all, we're about to become relatives. The transformation was remarkable and disgusting. These people who had been ready to have me removed from the church were now treating me like a long-lost friend. But their eyes weren't on me. They were calculating, measuring, evaluating what Brenda's inheritance might mean for their son's future. Dad, Brenda said, her voice stronger now as she walked down the aisle toward me. The recording mentioned legal documents. Do you really have them? I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope sealed and marked with the letterhead of Herrera, Martinez and Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. Your grandfather's lawyer gave these to me 3 days before your mother died, I said. She made me promise to hold on to them until you were ready to understand what they really meant. Brenda's hands shook as she reached for the envelope, but I didn't hand it over immediately. Mija, before you open this, I need you to understand something. Your mother's recording wasn't just about money. It was about character, about learning to value the right things. Alejandro stepped closer, his arm sliding possessively around Brenda's waist. Of course she understands, sir. Brenda has always been a person of strong character. Haven't you, darling? But I was watching my daughter's face, and I could see the internal struggle playing out in her expressions. She was remembering things, moments from her childhood, conversations we'd had, times when I'd worked double shifts to pay for her school trips or sports equipment. I remember now, she said quietly. When I was 15, I wanted to go on that school trip to Europe. It cost $3,000. You said we'd find a way and somehow the money appeared. I thought you'd gotten a loan. I worked security at the mall every night for 6 months, I told her. Midnight to 8 a.m., then construction work during the day. Your mother never knew because I didn't want her to worry. Tears started flowing again, but these were different tears. Tears of recognition, of shame, of dawning realization. And when I wanted that expensive laptop for college, she continued, her voice breaking, you said it was no problem. But I noticed you stopped eating lunch at work sites. Other workers mentioned it to me when I visited once. Computers were important for your future, I said simply. Lunch was just food. Alejandro's grip on Brenda tightened, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. The atmosphere in the cathedral had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a celebration was now feeling more like a courtroom, with truth serving as both prosecutor and judge. I could see Alejandro's family huddled together, whispering urgently among themselves as they tried to process this unexpected turn of events. Alejandro himself was attempting to maintain his charming facade, but cracks were beginning to show. His hand remained possessively on Brenda's waist as he spoke with forced lightness. Well, this is certainly an interesting family history, he said, flashing his practiced smile. Brenda, darling, why don't we postpone the ceremony for a few hours? Give everyone time to process this information properly. We can sort out all these financial details later. I watched my daughter's face carefully. She was studying Alejandro with new eyes, perhaps hearing something in his tone that she had missed before. Financial details? She repeated slowly. Alejandro, my father just revealed that he sacrificed his entire business, his financial security, his future, everything for my mother and me. And your first concern is about sorting out financial details? Alejandro's smile faltered slightly. Of course not, sweetheart. I just meant that we should handle this inheritance matter properly, with lawyers and advisors. $28 million is a significant sum that requires careful management. How did you remember the exact amount? Brenda asked quietly. The recording only mentioned it once. I saw the trap she was unconsciously setting, and I could tell Alejandro didn't see it coming. "Well, I have a good memory for important numbers," he stammered. "It's part of my business training." But Brenda was no longer looking at him with love and admiration. She was looking at him the way she might examine a problem she needed to solve. Alejandro's mother, sensing her son's misstep, jumped in with aggressive cheerfulness. "Brenda, dear, you must be overwhelmed by all this information. Why don't you come sit down? We can discuss everything calmly." "Mrs. Velasco," Brenda said, her voice taking on a tone I hadn't heard in years, the same tone she'd used as a child when she was working through a difficult math problem. 20 minutes ago, you watched your son push my father and call him unsuitable for this wedding. You laughed when I called him a failure. Now you want to discuss things calmly?" The older woman's face flushed red. "Well, emotions were running high. Wedding stress affects everyone differently." "But my father's appearance hadn't changed," Brenda continued with devastating logic. "His clothes were the same, his hands looked the same, his voice sounded the same. The only thing that changed was your knowledge of potential money in the family." I felt a surge of pride watching my daughter's analytical mind engage with the situation. This was the sharp, intelligent woman I had raised, finally cutting through the fog of social climbing and superficial concerns. Alejandro's father, a successful businessman who was used to controlling conversations, stepped forward with authority. "Now see here, young lady, you're being unfair to my son. Alejandro loves you. The money is just a bonus." "Is it?" Brenda asked, turning to face her fiancé directly. "Alejandro, tell me honestly, if there was no inheritance, if my father was just a poor carpenter, would you still want to marry me today?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. I could see Alejandro calculating, trying to find the right answer, but the very fact that he had to think about it was an answer in itself. "Of course I would," he said finally, but his hesitation had been too long, his tone too careful. "Then prove it," Brenda said, her voice growing stronger. "Dad, don't give me those documents. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. I don't want the inheritance." The reaction was immediate and revealing. Alejandro's face went pale, his family looked horrified, and several of his relatives actually gasped out loud. "Brenda, you can't be serious," Alejandro said, his charming mask finally slipping completely. "That's $28 million. You can't just throw that away." "Why not?" she asked simply. "If you love me, if your family accepts me, what difference does the money make?" "It makes a huge difference," Alejandro exploded, his true nature finally emerging. "Do you have any idea what we could do with that kind of money? The investments, the opportunities, the lifestyle we could have?" The cathedral fell silent again, but this was a different kind of silence. This was the silence of a room full of people witnessing someone reveal their true character in the ugliest possible way. Brenda stepped away from Alejandro, moving closer to where I stood. "So you don't love me," she said quietly. "You love what you thought I could bring you." "That's not... Alejandro stammered, but he was trapped by his own words. His mother tried to salvage the situation. "Brenda, dear, of course he loves you. But practical considerations are important in marriage. Surely you understand that." "I understand perfectly," Brenda said, and for the first time in years, she looked at me with something approaching respect. "I understand that I've been so focused on marrying into a better family that I forgot to notice whether they were actually better people." She began pulling the engagement ring from her finger, and Alejandro lunged forward to stop her. "Brenda, wait. Don't do anything rash. We can work this out. The money doesn't have to change anything between us." But it was too late. She had seen him clearly now, perhaps for the first time. She handed him the ring and turned to face the assembled guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the cathedral, "I'm sorry you came here for a wedding, but there won't be one today. I've just realized I was about to marry someone who loves my inheritance more than he loves me." The murmur that went through the crowd was like a wave breaking against the shore. Some people looked scandalized, others seemed fascinated by the drama, and a few appeared genuinely moved by what they had witnessed. Alejandro made one last desperate attempt. "Brenda, please, I do love you. The money it just makes everything easier." She looked at him with something approaching pity. "Alejandro, if you had stood by me when I said I didn't want the inheritance, if you had said the money didn't matter because I was enough for you, then maybe we could have worked through this. But the first thing you thought about was what you were losing financially. He had no answer for that because they both knew it was true. Brenda turned to me, her eyes filled with tears, but also with something I hadn't seen there in years: respect, love, and a deep, painful understanding of how badly she had misjudged everything. "Dad," she whispered, "can you ever forgive me?" The question hung between us like a bridge waiting to be crossed. "Dad, can you ever forgive me?" My daughter's words echoed through the cathedral, and I saw in her eyes something I hadn't seen since she was a little girl: genuine vulnerability, real remorse, and the desperate hope that love could survive even the deepest wounds. I looked at her standing there in her wedding dress, no longer the arrogant young woman who had humiliated me at the church entrance, but the daughter I had raised, the child I had loved unconditionally through every stage of her life. My heart, which had been shattered into pieces just an hour earlier, began to feel something like hope. But before I could answer, the cathedral doors burst open with a dramatic flourish. 3 people in expensive clothing strode down the aisle with the confidence of those accustomed to commanding attention wherever they went. The man leading them was tall, silver-haired, and wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. The woman beside him was elegant in the way that only comes from generations of wealth and privilege. Behind them walked a younger man, perhaps in his 30s, with the same aristocratic bearing. "Excuse me," the older man called out in a voice accustomed to being obeyed. "We're looking for Brenda Herrera. We understand there's been some discussion of family inheritance here today." The cathedral, which had been buzzing with murmurs and whispers, fell silent again. I felt my blood run cold as I recognized the name and realized who these people must be. "I'm Eduardo Herrera," the man announced, as if his name should mean something to everyone present. "This is my wife, Cristina, and my son, Ricardo. We are Brenda's biological family." Brenda's face went white. "Biological family? What are you talking about? My family is—" She looked confused, turning between me and these strangers. Eduardo smiled the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "My dear girl, didn't you listen carefully to that touching recording? Your mother Isabella was my daughter. She was a Herrera before she threw away her birthright to marry beneath her station." The words hit like physical blows. I watched Brenda process this information, saw her struggling to understand how her world had shifted so completely in such a short time. "You're my grandfather?" she whispered. "I was," Eduardo replied coldly, "until your mother chose poverty and disgrace over family honor. But blood is blood, and when we heard about today's interesting revelations, we decided it was time to reconnect." Cristina stepped forward with a predatory smile. "Darling, look at you. You're beautiful, just like Isabella was before she ruined her life. But we can fix all of this. You don't have to live in poverty anymore." I felt rage building in my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm. These people had abandoned Isabel when she needed them most, and now they were here to claim Brenda like a prize they had won. "How did you know about today?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fury I felt. Ricardo, the son, held up his phone with a smug expression. "Social media is wonderful, isn't it? Several guests posted videos of the dramatic scene here. Father humiliated at daughter's wedding. Secret inheritance revealed in church. Quite entertaining, really." The casual cruelty in his voice made my skin crawl. These people had seen my humiliation turned into entertainment and had rushed here not out of concern, but out of greed. Eduardo moved closer to Brenda, his voice taking on a coaxing tone. "Granddaughter, you've been living a lie. You're not the daughter of a common carpenter. You're a Herrera. You belong with us, in society, with people of your own class." "My own class?" Brenda repeated, her voice growing stronger. "And what class is that exactly?" "Wealth, breeding, education, sophistication," Cristina answered immediately. "Everything your mother gave up when she chose this person." She gestured dismissively toward me. I watched my daughter's face carefully. For a moment I was afraid. These people were offering her everything she had seemed to want: prestige, status, acceptance into high society. They were everything I wasn't and could never be. But then Brenda asked the question that changed everything. "Where were you when my mother was dying?" The silence that followed was deafening. Eduardo's confident expression faltered slightly. We didn't know she was ill," he said finally. "You didn't know," Brenda repeated slowly. "Or you didn't care." Cristina's mask of grandmotherly affection slipped. "Isabella made her choice when she married him. She cut us out of her life. We simply respected her decision." Respected her decision, Brenda said, her voice getting stronger with each word. My mother was dying of cancer. She needed help, support, family. And you respected her decision to struggle alone? Ricardo stepped forward impatiently. Look, that's all in the past. What matters now is the future. You're about to inherit $28 million. That kind of money requires proper management, sophisticated understanding of investments and tax implications. You need family who understands these things. Family who understands money, Brenda corrected. Not family who understands love. Eduardo's patience was clearly wearing thin. Love doesn't pay for healthcare, education, or lifestyle. Love doesn't build businesses or create legacies. Money does. You're right, Brenda said quietly, and my heart sank. But then she continued, money does do all those things, which is why my father sold his successful business, his legacy, his future security, to pay for my mother's treatments. Money was important enough to him that he gave up every penny he had for love. She turned to face them fully. You had money and chose not to help your dying daughter. My father had money and chose to give it all up to try to save her. Which one sounds like family to you? Christina's face hardened. Don't be naive, child. This man filled your head with romantic nonsense about sacrifice and struggle. But look around you. Look at this church, these guests, this wedding that just fell apart. Is this the life you want? Constant struggle, constant worry about money? Actually, Brenda said, looking around the cathedral with new eyes, this wedding fell apart because I was marrying someone who cared more about my inheritance than about me. Just like you care more about controlling that inheritance than about actually knowing me. Eduardo's facade of grandfatherly concern finally cracked completely. Fine, let's be direct. That inheritance comes with conditions, as the recording mentioned, but there are other conditions your mother's little recording didn't mention. Legal conditions. Family conditions. He pulled out his own set of documents. The inheritance can be contested if we can prove that you're not emotionally or mentally capable of managing such a large sum. Living in poverty, making impulsive decisions like cancelling your wedding, rejecting the guidance of your biological family, these could all be seen as signs of instability. The threat was clear and ugly. They were prepared to destroy Brenda legally if she didn't submit to their control. But something remarkable happened. Instead of being intimidated, Brenda laughed. It was a sound I hadn't heard from her in years. Genuine, joyful laughter. So you want to prove I'm unstable? She said, still laughing. Let me save you the legal fees. I am completely, utterly, joyfully unstable. I just cancelled my wedding to a man who saw me as a bank account. I just told my biological family, people I've never met who abandoned my dying mother, to go to hell. And you know what? I feel more sane than I have in years. She walked over to where I stood and took the legal documents from my hand. Without hesitation, without even looking at them, she tore them in half. I don't want the inheritance, she announced to the entire cathedral. I don't want money that comes with strings attached to people who measure love in dollars. Dad, donate every penny to charity, just like Mom suggested. The reaction was immediate and intense. Eduardo's face turned red with rage. Christina looked like she might faint. Ricardo started protesting loudly about legal challenges and family rights. Alejandro, who had been quietly lurking near the altar, suddenly found his voice again. Brenda, you can't be serious. That's $28 million. You're throwing away our future. Our future? She turned to him with incredulous laughter. Alejandro, I just cancelled our wedding. We don't have a future, and even if we did, it wouldn't be built on my family's money. But the inheritance is rightfully yours, Eduardo insisted, his voice taking on a desperate edge. It's family money. Herrera money. Brenda looked at him with something approaching pity. You're right. It is family money. And I'm giving it to people who understand what family actually means. Charities that help families facing medical crises, organizations that support widowed parents raising children alone, groups that assist families dealing with cancer. She turned back to me, and in her eyes I saw the daughter I had raised, the woman I had always hoped she would become. Dad, I don't need their money to be part of a family. I already have a family. I have a father who loved me enough to sacrifice everything, and a mother who loved me enough to make sure I learned what really mattered. That's worth more than all the Herrera money in the world. The silence that followed Brenda's declaration was different from all the others that day. This wasn't the stunned silence of shock or the uncomfortable silence of social awkwardness. This was the deep, resonant silence of truth settling into place, of hearts recognizing something real and precious. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the bitter, status-obsessed young woman who had humiliated me an hour earlier, but the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her stories, the teenager who would help me with carpentry projects on weekends, the young woman who had hugged me so tightly at her high school graduation that I could barely breathe. "Mija," I said softly, opening my arms. She fell into my embrace like she was coming home after a long, difficult journey, and in many ways she was. We both were. The expensive guests began filing out of the cathedral, some looking disgusted by the drama, others appearing moved by what they had witnessed. The Herrera family stormed out in fury, Eduardo shouting threats about legal action and family honor. Alejandro and his family followed shortly after, muttering about unstable women and wasted opportunities. But I barely noticed any of them leaving. All my attention was focused on my daughter in my arms, crying against my shoulder the way she used to when she was small, and the world seemed too big and scary. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered between sobs. "I'm so sorry for everything, for being ashamed of you, for caring more about what other people thought than about what you sacrificed for me. I'm sorry for wasting so many years being angry about things I didn't understand." I stroked her hair, still styled elaborately for the wedding that would never happen. "You don't need to apologize for growing up, Mija. Sometimes we have to lose our way before we can find our way home." "But I hurt you so badly," she said, pulling back to look at me with tears streaming down her face. "The things I said, the way I treated you. How can you forgive me so easily?" I cupped her face in my hands, these hands she had once been ashamed of, these hands that bore the scars and calluses of decades of hard work done out of love. "Brenda, do you remember when you were 7 years old and you broke your mother's favorite vase, the one her grandmother had given her?" She nodded, confused by the apparent change of subject. "You were so afraid to tell us because you thought we would stop loving you. Do you remember what your mother said?" "She said," Brenda's voice broke, "she said that love isn't something you earn or lose based on what you do. She said real love just is." "That's right. Real love just is. It doesn't have conditions or requirements or expiration dates. It doesn't depend on whether you're successful or grateful or even kind. I loved you when you were a perfect baby. I loved you when you were a rebellious teenager, and I loved you even when you were breaking my heart today. That's what parents do. That's what love does." The remaining guests, mostly elderly people who seemed more interested in witnessing genuine emotion than in social drama, had grown quiet, perhaps sensing that they were watching something sacred and private. "But the inheritance," Brenda said suddenly, seeming to remember what she had just given up. "Did I really just throw away $28 million? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "You did. How does it feel?" She was quiet for a moment, then a slow smile spread across her face. "It feels free. It feels like I just threw away a chain I didn't even realize was around my neck." "Your mother would be so proud of you," I told her. "She always worried that money would complicate your life, that it would make it harder for you to distinguish between real relationships and transactional ones. She wanted you to choose love over money, and that's exactly what you did." "I almost didn't," Brenda admitted. "For a minute there, when those people, my biological grandparents, were talking about class and society and sophistication, I felt that old pull, that desire to be accepted by people I thought were better than us." "What changed your mind?" She looked thoughtful. "I realized that they were offering me exactly what Alejandro was offering, acceptance based on what I could bring them, not who I was, and I thought about you, working 3 jobs, selling your business, sacrificing your dreams, never asking for anything in return except the chance to love me. Real love, unconditional love. How could I choose people who abandoned their own daughter over the man who chose to be my father every single day?" The cathedral was nearly empty now. Just a few stragglers and the wedding staff who were quietly beginning to clean up the decorations that would never frame a celebration. "What happens now?" Brenda asked. "I don't have a wedding. I don't have a fiancé. I don't have an inheritance. I'm 32 years old and I'm starting over." "Now," I said, "you get to discover who you really are when you're not trying to be someone else. You get to build a life based on your own values, your own choices, your own definition of success. Will you help me?" she asked, and in her voice I heard echoes of the little girl who used to ask me to help her reach things on high shelves, to help her with math homework, to help her understand why the world sometimes seemed cruel and unfair. "Mija," I said, "I've been waiting 32 years for you to ask me that question. Of course I'll help you. We'll figure it out together." As we walked out of the cathedral together, Brenda still in her wedding dress and me in my cheap suit, I thought about Isabel's recording, about the test she had designed, about the wisdom of a woman who understood that the most valuable inheritance she could leave her daughter wasn't money. It was the ability to recognize real love when she saw it. "Dad," Brenda said as we reached the church steps, "can I ask you something? Anything? Do you really not have any money saved? When you said you'd sacrificed everything for Mum's treatments, did you mean everything?" I smiled at her, thinking of the modest savings account I'd been building since Isabel's death, the small life insurance policy that had finally matured, the careful investments I'd made working with a financial advisor who specialized in helping working-class people build security for their retirement. "I have enough," I told her. "Enough for a comfortable retirement. Enough to help my daughter get back on her feet if she needs it. Enough to take care of the people I love. I'm not wealthy, but I'm not destitute either." "Good," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Because I have a confession to make. I don't actually know how to live without money. I've never had a job that wasn't just for show, never had to budget or worry about bills or figure out how to make ends meet. I'm going to need you to teach me how to be a real person." I laughed, feeling a joy I hadn't experienced in years. "That, Mija, will be my absolute pleasure." As we walked away from the cathedral together, father and daughter reunited after years of misunderstanding and pain, I realized that Isabel had been right about everything. Love was the only inheritance that truly mattered. And today, after nearly losing it forever, we had both finally learned how to claim it. The wedding guests had come expecting to see Brenda marry into money and status. Instead, they had witnessed something far more valuable. A daughter coming home to the father who had never stopped loving her. Two people choosing each other over everything the world told them was important. Some inheritances are measured in dollars. The best ones are measured in love, in second chances, in the courage to choose family over fortune and truth over convenience. And as we drove away from the church in my old pickup truck, Brenda's wedding dress spread carefully across the seat beside her. I knew that we were both finally rich in all the ways that actually mattered.